everybody, and welcome! Last week we took a deep dive into KSP2's development history. Thanks to everyone who watched and shared that video. One problem I highlighted in it was that assumptions about what the community wanted from a sequel to KSP were not verified before they started working on the game. You heard Scott Manley and Matt Lowndes state what they wanted from the sequel, but I didn't tell you guys what I wanted. So let's do exactly that this time around. 5 things I wanted from KSP2 and how much of that they managed to pull off. I know that there are multiple developers out there that are trying or will try to build a successor to Kerbal Space Program. If one of you is watching, maybe this will help you make some design decisions. Before we get into the details, make sure you are subscribed to my channel, because even though Take-Two is remaining silent on KSP2's future and my long history video, I am still researching things about the entire thing and there is surely more to come. But let's get into it and start with my first issue: performance. The very first time I talked with KSP2's creative director Nate Simpson, I told him,
now let's get to my main gripe about KSP1, which is performance.
As we all know, the game was seriously unoptimized when it was launched. But what I meant wasn't just graphics, performance, and frames per second for reasonably sized vehicles. No, if you have followed my channel for a while, you know that I like to build big. Be it my Normandy recreation, my giant cruiser, my space stations, or my ultimate KSP creation Invictus. All of them have huge part counts to be able to fulfill the purpose they were designed for. And here an ancient problem creeps in. The more engines you use, the slower the game runs. The developers have claimed they have an idea on how to fix that, but now that the entire studio is being laid off by the end of June, I don't have any hope that this is ever going to be implemented. Same for their approach to get more out of multi-threaded CPUs. I mean, I'm running a 12-core 24-thread chip in my rig. Sure, the AMD Ryzen 3900X is not the most modern processor out there, but it is still very powerful and it is basically idling on most of its cores when playing KSP or KSP2. And my graphics card is usually not that stressed either, so there is much room for improvement. Something that they did manage to improve significantly compared to the original KSP is loading times. Kerbal Space Program 2, with a couple of mods, starts up in a fraction of the time it requires the older game to even start loading mods. So at least they built this right. Speaking of building, this leads me to my next item: better building. Let me flip this around and start with what they did well in KSP2. The increased size of the vehicle assembly building is definitely a plus. With KSP I had to rely on hangar extender to make my huge vehicles even possible, so that's a plus. I also enjoy the fact that you can build multiple assemblies within the same workspace. Different lander configurations or booster types all within the same hangar that you can swap out easily, that's good. But here's what I'm still missing. If you enjoy building replicas, you want to get your proportions right. A 1-to-1 Starship clone should be 55 meters tall. Sure, there is the engineer's report that you can open and close all the time to get a rough size, but that is not always correct, especially when fairings are involved. A problem that was already present in the original KSP. Here is what I have to do instead. I build jigs out of parts which have an exact known size, for instance the 2.5 meter panels. Slap 2 together, you have a 5 meter ruler. Step 4 together, you get 10 meters, and so on. This is basically how I made sure my replica builds are proportional to their real-life counterparts. Obviously, when scaling up or down, you need to do some math, but still you need to measure it correctly. A pain point here are fairings. I have requested a height and diameter indicator for fairing segments since before KSP2 was announced. But those aeroshell builders are still far away from providing any useful information. Also, they are the closest approximation we can get for any curved parts, so that's a bit of a shame that there aren't more round parts like the spherical tanks for hydrogen or monopropellant. One of the most helpful mods for KSP was Kerbal Engineer Redux, and for KSP it is Micro Engineer. Both provide a lot of additional data for building your vehicle, some of which is now integrated in the stock game when you expand the staging UI. But one important figure is still missing there, both in KSP as well as KSP2, the torque indicator. It tells you how much your reaction wheels and thrust vectoring has to work to keep your vehicle on course when firing the engine. This is not so much a problem when you build a straight and simple stack, but when your creations get more creative or you have some asymmetric design like for a space shuttle replica, those torque numbers will determine whether or not you will be able to fly it or crash and burn in a painful way. Yes, there are indicators for center of mass and center of thrust, and they do help, but they are nowhere near as precise as the torque number readout. And with massive vehicles screaming through the void at alarming speed, precision flying tends to get important. Speaking of precision, it's time to move on to interplanetary navigation. One of the less fun aspects of Kerbal Space Program is planning trips far away from your home planet. In order for your spacecraft to reach another planet, especially one of the outer planets, you need to precisely line up the ships and the planet's orbit. The tools provided in both games only offer players to drag some vector indicators to change your ship's orbit. This works well when traveling to one of the moons of Kerbin, because both your destination as well as your point of origin are relatively close together and can be kept within the same view. However, if you for instance want to go to Elu, the planet furthest away, it can get really tedious lining up those orbits, especially since there's no way to increase precision for those maneuver node arrows. There are mods to work around that, for instance Precise Maneuver in KSP or the analog for KSP2 Node Manager. In those you can set very precise changes to the change in velocity applied to your planned maneuver, but it is still rather tedious. Autopilot mods like MacJab in KSP or K2D2 in KSP2 can take care of all of this by just telling them where you want to go, at least in theory. Oftentimes you still need to manually intervene to reach your destination, and to be honest, it's one of the most boring parts of the game. I want to go there, I know the principles behind why I'm dragging my trajectory here and there, but I'd really appreciate it if the game gave some pointers in which direction you should pull your gizmo arrows. And as Scott put it when I spoke with him for the KSP2 development history video,
half the time when I'm doing a Twitch stream, I'm like, let's build a crazy plane because I know I can get it up and crash it within 15 seconds, right? It's like, and that is way more exciting than let me sit down and calculate my I haven't quite got this trajectory. Oh, I've missed it, you know.
I had the same experience when I did my Joule 5 streams. The parts where I planned to get from one planet or moon to the other were dragging along and were not really entertaining for my viewers at all. It's not really fun to watch somebody fiddle with some gizmo for 30 minutes before the journey can continue. One nice addition to KSP2 was the trip planner, where you get ballpark delta V numbers for each planet or moon that you want to visit starting from Kerbin. However, this thing is a bit flawed because it doesn't take aerobraking into account, and you also cannot plan for any gravity assists. Those would be amazing to be integrated into the game, or any other space game, and if you could find a way to teach those in a fun way, it would even further teach people about spaceflight. Gravity assists are an important method in the real world after all. For instance, the Jupiter Icy Moon Explorer, or JUICE, that launched last year, will use multiple gravity assists to reach Jupiter. Gravity assists are also a tried and true practice when flying to the gas giant Joule within the game, and use for instance the very massive moon Tidal to either reduce your orbital velocity to get captured around Joule, or to increase it when leaving the planet. But this leads me to my next item. N-body physics. KSP and KSP2 use very simple orbital physics. Basically, planets are on rails and their gravity wells don't interact with each other. There is the Principia mod for KSP that adds N-body physics, but the last time I tried it, I was a bit overwhelmed by it and how it changed the game. Honestly, this is actually the reason why I want someone in game development to really take a stab at this. If you can manage to make N-body orbital mechanics easier to grasp, then you will open this topic up for the next generation of space scientists and rocket engineers. And KSP always was a teaching tool in addition to being a funny game about little green aliens. I already enjoy the dance of planets and moons, and this is why I love visiting Joule in the stock game or Sarnas in the Outer Planets mod. and KSP2 wanted to include the twin planets Rask and Rusk somewhere into interstellar progression. There are mods like Sigma Binary for KSP that turn regular planet and moon systems to a binary system, for instance Duna and Ike and Plock Karen, the binary planets at the edge of the outer planets in OPM. Ah yes, the Outer Planets mod. Why do I enjoy it so much? Well, that leads me to my final point on my wishlist. Exploring. If I am being honest, from the 3 big selling points for Kerbal Space Program 2, Interstellar was the one I was excited for the most. First off, as mentioned in my first item on this list, I like building big spaceships, and it probably won't get any bigger than building a humongous interstellar cruiser. However, the reason why I keep returning to the Outer Planets mod is the joy of exploring new worlds. Sure, Kerbin and the other stock planets are all fine for what they are, but Interstellar would have opened up the universe to new worlds to explore. We already mentioned the twin planets Rask and Rusk. There would have been Gurdama, Glumo, Puff, and a whole lot more celestial bodies to travel to and land on wherever possible. This is really the thing I was looking forward to the most, discovering new things within the game world. Sure, together with the For Science update, they added a couple dozen of so-called discoverables, basically more Easter eggs like the moon arches. But I have a problem with those. You can only stumble across them either by chance or by scanning a planet visually from orbit for hours on end until you can finally see something below. Back in KSP, we had KerbNet, which would enable players to pinpoint anomalies from orbit and then set a waypoint and land there. Something like that is sorely needed in KSP2. Maybe they had plans to include it later or provide more missions that would help players discover them, but as it stands now, it's rather tedious to find them. Maybe we can band together and kind of do a distributed discoverable search or something like that? Who of you would be up for that? Let me know in the comments. Alright, those are the 5 things I would have wanted from Kerbal Space Program 2. Do you agree with my list? Is there something that you specifically would have liked to see from the game? You might have noticed that I did not include prettier graphics in there because I would have assumed that a game that would be developed roughly a decade after the original would show some significant improvements in that area. As for multiplayer, I still plan to do a deeper dive into what that would have meant for KSP2. Personally, I believe that Kerbal Space Program was and always will be a single-player game first and foremost. But there was one situation where I would have wanted the sequel to have good multiplayer integration. I wanted to play the game together with my kids and share my love for space with them this way. But I guess I will have to find other options to do so. Speaking of options, aside from subscribing, you can also support my channel by becoming a YouTube member or a supporter over on Patreon. Not only can you get behind-the-scenes looks, but also early access to new videos as well as your name listed over here, like all of these wonderful people that believe in what I do. Thank you so much for your support. KSP2 may have taken many wrong turns, but I still have a few things I want to do with it, so keep an eye out for that when it comes out. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel for more and follow me on my social thingies. The links are in the description. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.